Chapter 5. Casa Rodrigo stood at the top of the hill, facing south toward the harbor. The two-story home was still the original mustard-colored stucco, but barrel tile had replaced the previous thatched roof. The windows were now protected by wooden shutters. Arbol stood in line with the other slaves just outside the arched veranda that ran the width of the house. His back was straight, shoulders back, head lifted. He wanted to stand out from the others, to be chosen as a house servant and spared the arduous field work he had performed since he had been brought to the island. He only hoped Don Bernardo remembered him. Senor Perez, who doubled as overseer for the De Rodrigo and Velasco plantations, paced back and forth, anxiously awaiting their arrival. From where he and the slaves stood, they could all just make out the mast in the distance. It wasn't long before they heard the horses. Arbol held his breath as first, the two horses pulling the uncovered wagon came into view, then Augusto, who was in charge of the stable. Sitting beside him was Don Bernardo. Behind them, holding onto the wagon, was one of the sons. But which one? Arbol hoped that whichever son it was, he had not changed. Life had a way of doing that to people, oftentimes for the worst. The wagon came to a stop, and several slave boys scrambled and massed to take care of the trunks and traveling bags. Don Bernardo jumped down and shook hands with Senor Perez. The overseer began talking animatedly. Arbol looked away and stared instead at the tall young man in the wagon. He watched the Spaniard stand, stretch, and walk toward the edge, then jump down smoothly and solidly. He was not at all what Arbol had expected or what he remembered. This was a young, handsome man with thick, impossibly black curly hair. He had a long, graceful neck and broad shoulders that tapered down to a thin waist. He was slim in the hips with a round, sculpted rear and long, shapely, muscled legs. Arbol's breath caught in his throat as the young man bent over to adjust his boots. Arbol sighed and licked his pink lips, and then the Spaniard stood and their eyes met. Even from that distance, Arbol was hypnotized by the penetrating gaze and the slow, easy, sensual smile that spread across the young man's face. Arbol dared to hope he was recognized, but it was his heart that responded. This man was, without a doubt, the boy who had brought his very own toys to Arbol when they were children, who had played with him. And he knew just by the feelings coursing through his body that this young man, this handsome creature, who now approached striding slowly and confidently, was the very same boy who had shared his birthday cake. Arbol's heart lurched as if with a mind of its own, then stopped as the world around him slowed down dramatically. Arbol's knees went weak, and he grew dizzy. He was sure he would faint. And then the young man spoke.
"Why do you look so familiar to me? Wait, are you Arbol?"
Sí, señor.
Good to see you.
Then he gave Arbol an unexpected powerful hug. Their eyes met as Alonso pulled away, and Arbol suddenly felt lost in the most wonderful of ways. Uncertain of what to say, Arbol nodded and grinned sheepishly as Alonso clapped him on his arm. Even as the young man moved away and introduced himself to the next slave, Arbol could still feel the warmth of Alonso's hand on his arm and the hot breath in his ear. He had to think of the most horrible, ugly thing he could imagine, lest anyone notice just how excited Arbol had become.